And you will never forget this refutation. And you should never forget this refutation. You are a dejected individual, a sick person.
So, Dawah are all the steps that precede jihad. In fact, you should and could see jihad as an extension of Dawah.
A mental and ideological slave. And I want you to remember that. Use the Hijab 10 discount code for 10% discount on a wide range of products, including premium Ethiopian black seed products. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we're going to be dealing with an intellectual fraud, an imposter, a duplicitous woman, an intellectual patroon, a slabberdigullion. Yes, a slabberdigullion. An individual who has been caught lying about their life experiences to try and manipulate facts, thereby outcasting and alienating and ostracizing not only the Muslim community which she abandoned, but the Somali community and the African community, because she was caught lying about her experiences, saying that she was there in Somalia when there was a civil war, when we know that she was in a completely different country. She was in Kenya, and she only fabricated those facts in order to gain the sympathy of individuals who she would thereafter use in order to attack the Muslim community.
Vlucht in een vluchtelingenkamp terecht bent gekomen. En vanuit het vluchtelingenkamp bent u doorgevlucht naar Nederland.
Ja, zoiets. Ik heb een hele verhaal verzonnen hoor, maar...
Hirsi Ali erkent dat ze nooit de burgeroorlog in Somalië heeft meegemaakt.
What a scandalous woman she is. What a scandalous woman she is. But not only is that the case, which will not be the subject of today's discussion, but she is an individual who, if you listen to her for more than 5 minutes, is a contradictory individual. Not only in what she believes in or espouses, but in what she says in her so-called intellectual engagements. Let's take a look at some of these clips that I found of a video in which she was talking about Dawah. Of all things, she talks about Dawah. The first thing I found quite interesting was the fact that she says, and this is quite interesting, being a black African woman, she completely separates herself from Africa and from the so-called developing world. And she says, listen to this, our Western heroes. Referring to whom? The founding fathers of America.
They're celebrated more than we celebrate the founding fathers, more than we celebrate any of our Western heroes.
And then thereafter, she says, she attacks Karl Popper.
Yeah, and I criticize Popper for jumping, for skipping Mohammed. He goes from Plato to Hegel, and in between, he forgets Mohammed.
And she feels that in many of her publications, that the Prophet Muhammad was unethical and so on. And yet, she says, our American hero, our Western heroes, referring to the founding fathers of America. Does she not know that the inception of America is almost no different at all from the inception of ISIS? The pillaging and raping and genocide of the Native American population? Does she not know, being someone who supposedly is against enslavement and so on, that so much of these founding fathers, they possessed slaves themselves? And what condemnation have we heard from this intellectual slave? Yes, because I believe if Malcolm X was alive today, that he'd point at that individual and he'd call her a house Negro. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. An individual like that, who looks up to the savior of the United States of America, and she says, our American heroes, we don't hear any criticism of a liberal kind, of a moral kind, forwarded to those individuals. So why is it the case that you choose to manipulate the facts, as we will see as this video progresses and matures, and try and smear not only just the Islamic world or the Muslim world, but Somalia as a country and Africa as a continent. Let me say something.
And then in the 10 years in Medina that followed, the call, the invitation, the persuasion, the use of language slowly transformed, maybe not so slowly, transformed into the use of force.
She starts talking about the Dawah, and she says it slowly transformed to the use of force. And obviously, for those who know the biography of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, there was a 13-year period in Mecca where the Muslims were being attacked, subjected to all kinds of torture, all kinds of boycott, all these kinds of things, which, by the way, evidences that this man, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, was sincere to his cause, since he was getting no so-called perks of this cause, for 13 entire years. And he was offered a way out many times. But in these 13 years, and then there was a 10-year period after that called the Medinan period. And she in her language says, slowly moved to the use of force. Well, if you look at chapter 22, verse number 39 of the Quran, it's very clear why that movement to the so-called use of force was implemented in the first place. أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَ بِأَنَّهُمْ ظُلِمُوا. That it has been given permission, express permission, for those believers who have been oppressed to fight back. So what she's trying to portray is this megalomaniacal attitude of the Muslim people, and this diabolical attitude, and this power-hungry, expansionist attitude, when in fact the very turning point in the seerah is outlined in the very Quran, couched with language of justification. Couched with language of justification. Justification because you have بِأَنَّهُمْ, or because they have been ظُلِمُوا, oppressed. But the language here should be telling. In the Quran, the reason why, and this is why the vast majority, and an argument could be made for all of the expeditions that took place in the Medinan period, were defensive. The Battle of Badr, the Battle of Uhud. It's an open secret. All you have to do is open a book of the biography of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and you'll realize that these were defensive expeditions. And most of them were fought on the borders of Medina. They had nothing to do with expansion, really.
So, Dawah are all the steps that precede jihad. In fact, you should and could see jihad as an extension of Dawah.
So this is a manipulative insertion by this individual, this low-life individual, who is trying to use Islam and Muslims and the developing world, so-called developing world, to create narratives of hatred and animosity. Clash of civilizations. She uses this all the time. Samuel P. Huntington's term.
So when a non-Muslim is invited to come to Islam and refuses, then force is justified.
You have scant attention to the facts. This is false. The Quran clearly says, and there is consensus among the jurists on this issue, that لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي فما يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها. Chapter 2 verse 256. There is no compulsion in religion. That truth has been made clear from falsehood. So whoever wants to disbelieve in falsehood and believe in truth, then they will have the true anchorage. فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها. The Quran says in chapter 18, فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Whoever wants to can believe, and whoever wants to can disbelieve. And yes, these verses are, the context is talking about disbelievers, non-Muslims. No, there's nothing in the Quran, and there is nothing in the Sunnah, you liar, that indicates that if people do not become Muslim, that force is thereby justified. You are a liar. You are a liar. Just as you lied about your life story to try and bring yourself into the West. You lie about the Quran and you sit there on podiums and manipulate the facts And you thought you'd get away with it, didn't you? And you thought you'd get away with it, didn't you?
The biggest challenge is the extent to which agents of Dawah,
Listen to what she said, agents of Dawah, meaning spreading Islam. The word Dawah means really inviting people to Islam. Agents of that, so people that try and invite people to Islam.
can exploit the constitutional and legal protections that guarantee American citizens freedom of religion and freedom of speech, freedoms that would, of course, be swept away if the Islamists achieve their goals.
That's right.
And this is actually part of her book, so-called book, which is not even referenced and is a nonsense book talking about the Muslim Brotherhood and other such things, and making it seem as if the Muslim Brotherhood have some kind of handhold on the Western Dawah. It's absolutely false. Most people don't subscribe to Muslim Brotherhood ideology, if you want to call it that, in the West.
Our society then says enough is enough, and up to here, not further. We're going to enforce the rule of law.
Meaning what here? What is she actually trying to say? She is saying the constitutional rights that they have in America, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, are being exploited by the Dawah carriers, if you want to call them that for the sake of argument, and that those individuals really have to obey by the rule of law, and enough is enough. Inference made that what you're saying is that Dawah should not be present and there should be laws against it. You are, in your own words, an immigrant. You've come from, in 1992, you've come from another country seeking refuge, and now you're saying enough is enough? Who on earth do you think you are? Who on earth do you think you are? And what do you think this is? This is fascism. In her entire presentation, there's nothing I understood more than in her own fascistic inclinations and tendencies. She's trying to disguise it. But the truth is the truth. This is it. We have to know the friend from the foe, like Carl Schmitt, the famous political philosopher representing fascism, would say. And by the way, you can have a fascistic liberalist. You can have that. Fascism and liberalism are not two completely diametrically opposed things. They can actually work in tandem with one another. It's possible. So this is a kind of fascistic presentation. Why don't you just say that? That certain things should be off limits for certain people, and that there are, clear boundaries, as you want to put it. So you have a fascistic presentation. You're saying this kind of censorship should be allowed. So you want freedom of expression and freedom of speech to apply to almost all other religions and all other peoples, but not to the Muslims and to Islam. This is nothing but a type of fascism. And if you want to refute that, you can try and refute that. But believe you me, with your pseudo-intellectual, lacking of knowledge, you won't be able to refute much. And what I find really problematic, that is so sickening to the core to listen to this woman speak.
It's unfortunate that we now have a democracy where opposition, healthy opposition, has become obstruction.
So it's okay to criticize Islam, and that becomes obstruction. But when Dawah is done, which is Islamic propagation, let's say for the sake of argument, that should be outlawed, and enough is enough. So hold on, do you not see the inconsistencies in what you're saying? You are literally complaining at the fact that any criticism against Islam, according to your understanding, is seen as an obstruction, you call it healthy opposition. So when criticism of Islam is done, it's called healthy opposition. And when that is challenged, it's called obstruction. But when propagation of Islam is done, which is a constitutional right according to US constitutional law, for example, that is somehow the obstruction. So all you're saying is, let's treat different people differently. You're not even making an argument from violence. You're not even saying this is directly correlatable with violence. And even if you did make that argument, it'll be a weak argument, because correlation doesn't always mean causation. It's a fallacy. So you have no leg to stand on here. Your inconsistencies are glaringly obvious. How can you live with yourself having such inconsistencies? This kind of cognitive dissonance. How can you live with yourself with this kind of intellectual cognitive dissonance? Just 10 minutes before that, you were saying it's not healthy obstruction. And now you're saying it's healthy obstruction. It's called obstruction. It's not healthy opposition. You're completely a contradictory person. You make me sick. You make me sick.
What you are is a public intellectual.
The man, he puts his hand on her hand and he says, you are a public intellectual. How patronizing. How condescending. You are a public intellectual. Now you've got the seal of approval from the white man that you wanted to get the seal of approval from. And then he says, in another place, he says, actually, when she talks about her immigrating from, so-called from Somalia, but really from Kenya or wherever it was, we don't know. In 1992, he goes, you're doing fine. Let's take a look at this.
You know, I came to the West in 1992, so I'm a newcomer. But
You're doing fine.
Thank you.
So he's giving her his approval, you know. Don't worry, you're a public intellectual, even though you don't have the qualifications for that, or you haven't done peer-reviewed stuff, but you're a public intellectual. But look how condescending this is. Could you imagine a white man like that putting his hands on Jordan Peterson and saying, you're a public intellectual? Jordan Peterson will look up at him and say, excuse me, what the hell are you doing? Or any of the people that, you know, in the West now who are pop academics, putting their hands up on Richard Dawkins or any of these individuals and saying, you are a public intellectual. He'll say, excuse me, I don't need your endorsement. With all due respect, I don't need, you know, this is embarrassing. And you're smiling there, sitting, soaking it all up. This is exactly what you wanted, isn't it? You wanted the white man, your savior, to come and put his hand on yours. Quite physically, actually, not just intellectually, because you have been ideologically molested. You have been ideologically molested, yes. Put his hand on it and say, you're a public intellectual. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Is that the way you want to earn respect in this world? How embarrassing. You're a joke. You are an absolute joke.
If the question is whether the West has the courage to defend itself, has the will to defend itself, then you've just identified the central sub-question within that question, and that is, will the United States of America stop wringing its hands?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I hate to say it, but something has to happen to make us focus and to stop wringing our hands. And looking at all of that, I think it is, I don't know, I feel a sense of urgency. I hope that you feel a sense of urgency, that we have something to defend.
Now, this actually boiled my blood. Of the many things that she said, maybe this is in the top 3 things that she said that actually boiled my blood. The West, United States of America, which went into a land which was not theirs, let's say, and completely destroyed the natives, built up and went against many a treaty. And then after that had, 11 successive wars in a span of, I don't know how many years. How many people have they killed? How many expeditions have they had? Vietnam, North Korea, Iraq. How many people innocents have died under the superpower reign, the short superpower reign of the United States of America? And you have the audacity, you and that idiot that's sitting next to you, to say, when the West will defend itself, you're using the word defend with a country that is the only, or with a hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, which is the only hemisphere responsible for a nuclear deployment of nuclear weapons, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You're talking about that? Defend itself? Are you sick in the mind? Are you that mentally enslaved and intellectually subservient and intellectually molested and ideologically molested that you are actually talking about defense for the biggest bullies history has ever known? You really should be ashamed of yourself, but you should be humiliated. You should be humiliated. You make me absolutely sick. And this is the reason why those people who hang around together, you, Majid Nawaz, Sam Harris and co, you hang around together, but you'd never, Ben Shapiro even, I put him in there as well, you guys would never, you don't have the fortitude or the courage to stand forward against the people that you're attacking, who are the Muslim community. Get someone from the Muslim community and debate them. You are a coward. You are manipulating the facts. How can this man just be sitting there from the Hoover Institute and allowing you to get away with so many blunders? And you'll never forget this refutation. And you should never forget this refutation. You're a dejected individual, a sick person, a mental and ideological slave. And I want you to remember that. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.